the Frugal Libertarian. So I figured I would do video 2 of my series on having a Thanksgiving Day premature baby and him being in the NICU. So in video 1, which I'll put the link to in the description, video 1 was all about going into preterm labor and my cesarean delivery. And this video is about my son's care and the NICU and what it was like having a baby in the NICU. My son was 6 weeks premature. He was delivered at 34 weeks. When he was born, they had to rush him out of the delivery room. I didn't get to hold him. My husband didn't get to hold him. I didn't even really see him. They ran him past me like this, paused and said, "Here, Mom," and then ran. His face, from what I could see, was purple and blue. That was because he was born with undeveloped lungs. Lungs are the last thing a baby really develops. Now the issues are, especially the micro preemies, a lot of their major systems are not developed by the time they are delivered. My son had most of his systems developed. In fact, there's a specific valve in their heart that is open while they're gestating, that towards the end of your pregnancy, it closes. My son's was almost closed when he was delivered, and then it was completely closed within a few days. The earlier a baby is, the more complications there are. There's also, even my son's age, my son was very, very lucky that was the major thing wrong with him, was just breathing. As much as time, yes, you need as much time in there as possible. Each kid that goes in there is completely individual. And there is no guarantee on any of them. And I think actually this is like one of the hardest jobs in the hospital, if I'm honest with you. These are doctors and nurses with babies that know not every one of them will survive. And I can't imagine what it's like to do that job and have a baby not make it. I can't imagine what it's like to deal with that as the staff. So these people are really, it is something that I think you have to have a certain disposition and a certain mental ability to do the job because of that. So my son was in the NICU for almost a month, and the real main issue he was there was his lungs, was the prematurity of his lungs. The first week there, he had what's called a CPAP machine, and it's this thing that goes, it was like basically tied to his head, almost looks like a helmet, and it has these tubes coming down, and they go into your chest, and they make you breathe. They make you breathe. And that way his lungs could develop without his body having to do the work. He had that for about a week. While he had that in, when he was first there, he also had, his right hand was strapped to a board. It was flattened like that to a board and taped in place. And every time because he's a person, he's a kid, he'd move. Every time he would like move his finger a little, they'd have to take it off and retape it, and it was so awful to watch. But they did that because he had an IV in the back of his hand. He also had one in his umbilical cord that came out really quickly, like within a day or two, I believe. And then he had all sorts of wires and stuff all over him for monitoring. He had stuff on his feet, he had stuff on his chest, he had just wires everywhere. He was immediately put into what's called an isolate, which is like a big plastic, it's not even, it doesn't even look like a bassinet, it's like a box. And it has holes on the side that you can open and put your hand in, so the baby can stay in there, and you can like change their diaper or, you know, touch them or anything without having to open the whole thing. I didn't get to hold him for 5 days. I was the first person to hold him. My husband was the second. And it wasn't until we had held him that then the NICU staff let our parents hold him, because they have a rule that the parents have to be the first to hold them. other than the staff. The parents have to be the first family to hold them. And because of his prematurity, the other issue he had right away was that he did not have the sensory development yet to be able to be touched. So touching him caused him to freak out and scream. And it was really hard as a parent because you want to hold them and you want to comfort them by stroking them. If you stroked him, he would scream. You had to put your hand in and touch it and just lay it there. And even then, sometimes he'd scream. It was too much. Because in the womb, they wouldn't be getting any of that. And that was hard. And when he had all these wires and he had the IVs and all this stuff going on in the machine, he was constantly trying to get it off, number one. And the nurses said he had the worst temper in the NICU because he would just scream and scream and scream anytime they tried to do anything with him. Changing his diaper, he'd scream. Having to move the tape on something, he'd scream. Touching him at all, he'd scream. And that's what they said to us. They said he has the worst temper in the NICU. However, after week 1, his CPAP machine came off and he was switched to what's called a cannula, which is the little thing that goes under their nose, and then there's oxygen tubes, and that little bit feeds oxygen into them. Once they took the cannula off, he didn't have as much stuff taped to his face. He did have a nasal tube for feeding, which is why he actually stayed as long as he did. They were able to take the IV out of his hand, so he got his hand back, and they'd taken the IV out of his umbilical cord very quickly. He only had that for a couple of days. So once all this stuff started to leave, he calmed down. And then he became like the happiest, sweetest little kid in the NICU. And my husband came in from work one day, and because he works a 12-hour shift, when he went in to go see our son, it was the middle of the night. And he walked in and all the nurses were in his room playing with him, and he was just like smiling at them and being cute, and they were taking turns holding him because they said he was the sweetest. So he went from the worst temper to the sweetest and the cutest and the happiest and all of that. So it tells you a lot of how much was bothering him. And as he got older and he started to develop more, then he could handle the sensory touch, and then we got to really hold him and play with him and touch him. He had the cannula for about a week. While he was on the cannula, that's when he was switched from an open isolate into just a glass bassinet, which is what they used. He then quickly, within another week, went to what they call room air, which is just breathing normally. The reason he stayed at the NICU after that point was because he had an eating issue. And it was so simple now looking back that it's like, you feel so silly even saying it because it was so simple to fix, and it was fixed in such a simple way. Basically, what happened to him was every time we would try to bottle feed him, and it would be especially me and my husband this would happen, he would suck and suck and suck on the bottle, and then he would have eaten none of it. When they turned it and looked at the measurement, he would have eaten none of it. And the stuff that was all going down his face, all the way down into his clothes, and you have to change him because he'd be soaking wet. And he would have eaten nothing. And we were getting so upset. We were getting so frustrated. We couldn't get him to eat. And the nurses were having a hard time getting him to eat, so they had to leave his tube in his nose to feed him. First they had it in his mouth, but then he kept pulling on it and messing with it, so they moved it to his nose because it was harder for him to pull on. So they had to keep the tube in his nose, and they said they can't send him home until he's gone, I think it was 3 days with no tube in his nose. And remember, he was born on Thanksgiving morning. We were heading into December, we were heading into Christmas and Hanukkah. We wanted him home, and it was getting to be a lot to have to go in at least once a day, sometimes twice a day, sometimes being there from morning until night. I never stayed overnight. I was healing from my cesarean. I wanted my bed, and I wanted a full night's sleep, and I wanted to relax and heal. And I was going to say that's the only positive of having a baby in the NICU is your baby is being very well cared for, so you can stay home and heal and relax. and allow yourself to heal. Whereas if he was home, I would have had to been up all night and, you know, getting in and out of bed constantly, and it would have, not sleeping, it would have been much harder to heal from the cesarean. By the time he came home, I was pretty much healed up, and then I was able to be up at night and dealing with less sleep and you know, not having a steady schedule and all of that. All of the nurses I adored, except one who really yelled at me and really talked down at me and actually, like I said, yelled at me about how you're never going to be able to get him to eat. I know that I don't see you walking around in here. I know you're not here as much as you should be. And you don't know what you're doing with your child, and I can guarantee you that within a week he'll be back here because you won't get him to eat, and you're not going to take care of him right. He's going to be sick, and he's going to end up back here. Like that at me. And I got so upset. And she was only his nurse that one time, and she never came back. And I was very grateful that she never came back, because frankly, when I told my husband she had said that, he was mad. Because he was like, what right does she have to say that to you? She doesn't know what your life is like. She doesn't know what you're going through. She can't tell you what to do. He's like, and why does she think we're such terrible parents? She spent one day with our son. How does she know we're terrible parents and he's going to get sick and he's going to end up back? And so he was mad. I think he mentioned it to another nurse, which is why this nurse was never on schedule with my son again. The other nurses we had were amazing. There was one that kind of we learned a lot from. She showed us, you know, some really easy burping methods. We learned, you know, my husband had never changed a diaper before. I had, because I have 3 nieces and 3 nephews on my side of the family that were, you know, I babysat a lot of them. So I did know how to change a diaper. My husband had never changed a diaper. So he learned how to change a diaper. You know, we changed his clothes. We know, you know, we had practice while having somebody very skilled and very knowledgeable watching over us and saying, okay, you're doing that right, or okay, let's do more of that or less of that, things like that. And also I could be home and heal up and be healthy by the time he came home. So those were the 2 positives. Of course, the negative was the guilt and the awfulness of not having your baby come home with you when you leave the hospital. Remember, I mean, when you first have a cesarean, you're not driving. You can't, like, you know, walk easily. So the idea of not having him here, I couldn't just go and visit him when I wanted. I needed somebody to drive me. And the NICU he was in had a very limited list of people that could come in. It was us and then 4 other people. So it was us and our 2 sets of parents. And that was it. Nobody else was allowed into the NICU. So if someone else was going to drive me, I felt like a jerk. Like, what, I'm going to make you wait for me in the hospital cafeteria while I visit my baby? Like, I just didn't feel right doing that. So I couldn't, unless my parents or my husband's parents were driving me, I didn't feel comfortable asking for rides. So that was also why, you know, we would both go when we could. I had the extra smack in the face. The day I came home from the hospital was the Sunday of the mid-season finale of Walking Dead, where Beth died. And I came, and I was already hormonal. I just had a baby. I left him at the hospital when I came home. And then I'm watching the show and Beth dies. I cried for like 2 hours. I could not stop crying because Beth died. And I'm like, everybody laughs at me like, seriously, you took it that badly? I'm like, I was hormonal. My life had just changed. My son was in the hospital. And, you know, that kind of thing. So yes, there are a lot of negatives too. So week 3, like I said, my son started having eating issues and we're trying to get him to eat and he wouldn't eat. And it was not until this one nurse that was the nurse who was there for all of his steps on his way home. She was the one that got the CPAP taken off. She was the one that got him moved to the bassinet. She was the one that got him moved off of the cannula. She figured out what was going on. Because like I said, it wasn't just us. We couldn't get him to take the bottle, but most of the nurses couldn't either, or had a lot of difficulty. She was giving him his bottle and looked and watched what he was doing. And he was blocking the nipple of the bottle with his tongue. He would either put his tongue to the roof of his mouth and block it that way, or he would actually go like that and block it through the front. And that's why he would suck and get nothing. Once we knew what it was, we started learning the tricks to how to get him to bottle feed and to see what was happening when he was doing that, so that we could know, okay, pull the bottle out and redo it. And we learned all these little tricks and figured out how to get him to feed, and then we were able to get him to feed. And we were able to get him to feed, and then he had his tube out, his nose tube out, and then 3 days later he came home. And he came home on December 22nd. And so we were home with him Christmas and New Year's. Missed Hanukkah completely. But when you have a NICU baby, you can't take them out right away like other babies, because you don't want to expose them to things because they've already been in the NICU. You already know what it's like. You don't want them catching stuff. So when people would come over, we would have to Purell right away before they touched him. They would, you know, anybody who even had a little bit of a sniffle, they could not come in the house. We couldn't take him out anywhere other than doctor's appointments. We pushed that to 3 months. Yep, 3 months. And once we hit 3 months, then we started taking him just to houses. So to friends' houses and family houses. And then I believe it was 5 months we finally started taking him into actual public. And that was because, again, you're worried about him catching something and ending up back in the NICU. The other trick we learned once we came home, the NICU, they have a set schedule. Even if they're asleep, you wake them up at X time to feed them. You change their diaper and feed them and then put them back, and then they can go back to sleep. And that has to do with the way they do their shifts, the way they have multiple babies they have to look after, so they have to have everything super scheduled like that. We tried doing that when he first came home. It lasted about 2 days. And then he still wasn't, he was eating, but he wasn't eating a lot. And I said, you know what? I'm not waking him up anymore. I'm going to let him sleep as long as he wants. And when he wakes up, then I will give him his bottle. The minute we started doing that, he drank his bottle empty every time. Now realize he had to have formula. I could not breastfeed. It was something I had, when he was born, I pumped and tried to see if I could. However, one of the medications I take for my condition cannot breastfeed on it. You can be pregnant on it, you cannot breastfeed on it. But that was why I didn't breastfeed. I couldn't be without my meds. And due to that, my meds couldn't be given to him. And actually, they couldn't be given to any baby. And that was hard because at first I was pumping, bringing it to them, they were freezing it, and then waiting for, you know, him to get the okay to eat. And he was not, it was not able to be used, and they had a hard time throwing it away. So that's why he was formula fed, because I couldn't do it. So anyway, that was our NICU story. If you guys had a NICU baby or preemie or anything, please share your stories. If this is your first video watching, please watch the first video and click subscribe. Give me a thumbs up if you liked this. If you had similar experiences or totally different NICU experiences, please share them below. I'd love to hear your stories. Have a great evening, and I'll hopefully talk to you soon. Bye!